as of right now. Well, hello everyone, and we are back again with yet another Language of Healing Live. Today we're going to be discussing Chapter 7, my personal favorite chapter in the book, Cultivating Compassion, from a Language of Healing for a Polarized Nation. And today we have a real treat. We have Anna LeBaron, who is hands down one of the greatest book launchers in the entire world. She launched our book, and she launches books by a bunch of other really super famous people. And she wrote her own book that looks something like this, The Polygamous Daughter. It's a phenomenal read, and I'm so shocked that it's not a movie yet, but I'm sure that it will be at some point. So Anna, welcome. Unmute yourself and lead us.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Arnita and Wayne. It is such a pleasure, such a pleasure for me to be able to facilitate this discussion today. As you know, I loved the book, and I was so honored to be able to read that manuscript copy and then provide that endorsement that I wrote for the book. It's such an important book for the world that we live in today, and who even knew that the book would be so needed in this year at this time with everything that's going on in the world? I mean, what providence that allowed for these things to happen and the events to take place. And I'm so delighted that I got to work with all of you to launch the book. It was just an honor. So I probably have said that already 3 times, and it's because I mean it, and it's so much fun for me as well. So thank you guys. And I want to talk about first a few little housekeeping things. So the first 15 minutes or so of this discussion, I'll be directing the questions to the authors, Arnita, Bob, and Wayne. And then after that, we want the rest of you to join in this conversation, and we will just kind of see where it goes, answer the questions, and then I have a few here selected, and then we want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to join in on this conversation, this very important conversation. I selected Chapter 7 to my questions from Chapter 7, and so I'm just going to dive right in. And a reminder to introduce yourself before you speak the very first time and answer a question or ask a question. So my very first question, we're just going to dive right in. COVID-19 has impacted all of our lives. We are living in historical times, and 100 years from now, people are going to be talking about this pandemic the way we talk about the Spanish flu and other events that are historical, and the way that we're referencing those events, people will be talking about us. It has impacted our health, our livelihoods, our work, our relationships, and even our celebrations. And there's so much discussion and disagreement about the economy, about education, and whether people should or shouldn't be forced to wear masks out in public. In some ways, we are all suffering, though some are suffering way more than others. On page 101, Bob says, "Compassion is a genuine concern for the sufferings and misfortunes of others." So my question to the authors is, how do we show genuine concern for others when we are also suffering ourselves in one way or another? Arnita, you want to answer first?
Of course not. You want to answer that first? Hard. You know, how to show genuine compassion when you're in the middle of everything. You know, one of the key aspects of everything that's going on is for us to have enough compassion and concern to understand that everything going on affects everyone differently, because we all live very different lives with different variables. And part of being compassionate is to understand that. And sometimes that will mean not saying something when you should when you shouldn't say something because you don't understand why people don't see it the way you do, it's because they're not living it the same way. They're not experiencing it the same way that you are. So part of being compassionate is understanding that there are people suffering at different levels than me. My husband is in the restaurant industry. It has been catastrophic all the way around, catastrophic. So, I understand that there are waitresses, wait staff who live day to day, week to week off of tip money. That is gone. That has been gone for a long time. So I'm particularly compassionate with people who are in the restaurant industry right now, whose incomes have at least, some of them that are just gone. And so we are all experiencing this differently, and but we're all trying to survive together. So having a little bit more understanding there, I think compassion helps us do that.
Bob?
Yeah, from where I am, compassion is literally empathy combined with action. We can all empathize. All of us. I mean, unless you're a sociopath, you have empathy, and you can feel what other people feel. We have the ability to put ourselves into other people's shoes, but it's not enough to just feel the empathy. It's empathy combined with action. Absent that, then compassion becomes merely pity, and nobody wants pity from other people. And so compassion, I think, dictates to us that we must move forward. It's a difference between, and when you say, when we're all hurting, and we are, I mean, we all go through our own stuff, but it's a shift from being selfish to selfless, to feel other people's pain, to acknowledge their pain, and then to literally put feet to that empathy. That's how the world changes, from where I sit anyway.
And what about you, Wayne?
I like what Arnita and Bob have both said. I think compassion isn't something that we can pretend to do. The reason we put it in the middle of the book is because these are things that have to develop over time, being comfortable in your own skin, cultivating compassion. Lovely title for the chapter, because you cultivate over time. Mm-hmm. I think people in need feel need greater than people who are outside of need. So I don't think the fact that we're all suffering COVID inhibits our sense of compassion. Where it may inhibit it is the lack of proximity. We talk about that a lot in this chapter. Proximity, if you don't have compassion for people, it's because you don't know them and you don't know their story. And so no empathy rises in your heart when you hear about somebody, or you blame them for their problem. So you don't have to connect with them at a human level. So cultivating compassion, to me, it's a lifestyle choice from here on out, to give people proximity to your life, to really care. Where you've been hurt. I found that whenever I raise money for some kind of need, the people who have known that need are quicker to give than my rich friends who've never known that, and they'll proportionately, people who've known need will give more out of themselves because they know what it's like to be there. So maybe that helps us all get there.
Yeah. So the question number 2, on page 108, Arnita, you talked about 3 levels of compassion: primary, secondary, and tertiary. That was a big word. Can you explain those levels and then provide some personal examples of each so that we have some context for your reply?
Well, I think in the book, the point that I'm trying to make is it's not hard to be compassionate. Some people think it's a big, long, drawn-out thing that I have to write a big check or I have to go get a passport to go to another part of the world. Compassion is all around you when you have eyes to see it. And so primary compassion could just be someone that I know, that I see them suffering and I want to help provide a need. And a secondary compassion will be someone, a friend of a friend, that needs some help. And then tertiary is just a big scientific word for third. It just means the third place. And so it could be, I might want to support Wayne's organization as a tertiary act of compassion. But my point is, it's all around every day. Just this week, it's funny, someone called me and said, "Hey, Arnita, a lot of people, I want to donate some groceries to someone. Could you give me an organization?" And I thought, no, I can't give you an organization because you probably can't donate it that way right now, but I've got a friend who could use some groceries. And she called me back and she says, why did you think about it? How did you have an answer so quickly? I was like, because compassion is linked to proximity. It's people close by. It's probably people on my street that need food, at this time. And so it was easy to do that. I just want everyone to understand that compassion, it's a way of looking, it's a way of living. As Wayne said, it's very intentional and it's all around us. And you don't have to spend money sometimes. You can just look for needs to feel. I think in the book I talk about buying someone's pancakes on the 60-cent pancake stack day at IHOP. Well, what did that cost me? But really and truly, that was just an act of compassion. Didn't cost me much. I just thought of it and did it. And everyone can do that, because I do think being compassionate is a huge proponent of healing ourselves in society.
Okay. So the name of the book, A Language of Healing for a Polarized Nation. Just watching my social media, I don't think there's a topic that's any more polarizing right now than what people are going to do about educating their children this fall, and what school districts are just deciding, and what the government is mandating. And it's causing a lot of people stress and anxiety. And as a follow-up question to that, what I asked Arnita, I wanted to ask the three of you, there are many people facing choices about how they will be schooling their children. Like, my children are grown, so it's not a question that I am facing, but a lot of parents are. So what are some ways that we can apply these levels of compassion to the choices of others that don't necessarily match the choice that we are making, or that individuals are making for their own children?
I can jump in on that. So I don't have children in school either, but I have grandchildren that are in school. And I have a wife who is a school teacher, a first grade teacher, and I have a daughter who's in this room, Liz Ratliff, who is also a teacher. And so this is a very personal issue for me. And I have some strong thoughts on it. But part of living a compassionate life means, I remember when we first met Arnita. And Arnita likes to say, the first thing you need to know about me is, what is it, Arnita?
I am not you.
I'm not you.
The rest will make a lot more sense after that.
Exactly. And so not everybody sees through the same lens that I see through. And so compassion demands that I have grace, again, my empathy, my ability to feel what they feel. There are parents that can't go back to work because their children are home and they can't afford childcare. So I understand that. I don't want my wife going back, or my daughter going back with kids in the classroom when COVID, my goodness, in our neck of the woods in Central California, it's exploding. There was a chart just a week ago, Bakersfield, California, where we live, is the second fastest growing COVID spot in the nation. And there are a ton of reasons for that. And they irritate me. But, people see things through a different lens. And like Arnita said, they're not me. And so it all makes sense. They're not me. They don't have to look at the world the same way that I do. So that's what I'm thinking. What do you got, Wayne?
I was thinking we faced all this back in the late 60s, early 70s, 80s, when the culture wars were beginning. And whether you put your kids in homeschool, private school, or public school, there was a real, particularly among Christians, there was a real animosity if you didn't make, quote unquote, the right decision. We put our kids in public school, and we took some flack from people who thought we were sending them out there to a godless world. And so I think what we need to keep in mind, and judgment comes up in this chapter a lot, because if you're judging people, you're not loving them. You're not being compassionate towards them. And I think it helps us keep in mind the right answer for me is not necessarily the right answer for you. And if we can be generous with letting people make choices that they think are the best options for them to go to, and be loving when that's different than ours, I don't think that's so difficult. I think we can learn that pretty easily when we're not feeling victimized by other people's choices. So.
And Arnita, before you answer, we're past the 15-minute mark, so I'm going to invite some of the others who have joined our conversation. And Liz, I do want to hear from you, And I know that my friends Mark and Madeline, who have joined the conversation as well, they've made some interesting choices for their own kids. And so I want to hear from them as well after Anita.
Well, no, actually they can go first. Again, I think personal choice and what works for one family doesn't have to work for another family. Again, one of the themes in a language of healing is we try to communicate how not to demonize people who don't do it your way. And this is just another opportunity to do that. People are making their decisions totally based on the best way they know how for their family. And you're not privy to all that information because that's a personal boundary for them. So sometimes in order to be compassionate, you just have to relax the control because you really don't control their decision. And if your emotional stability is not strong enough that you can really sustain and be in relationships with people who do things differently than you, then you're probably going to be cocooned off with people like you. So I'll just leave it at that.
So Liz, your dad said that you're a teacher, and
Yes.
so I'm sure you have some thoughts and feelings and ideas, and we would love to hear from you about that.
I'm a teacher and a parent of 4 children, all school age, 1 middle school and the others are elementary. So all of it, I've had to struggle with all of the what ifs and everything. And I'd be the first one to tell you I would love to be back in the classroom and teaching my children. I teach those who are in poverty, mostly, some in middle class, but mostly the lower end. So I go into an area where COVID is actually pretty rampant because they live in close quarters with each other, and therefore they would be bringing it into the classroom. I don't feel that it's a safe place to go right now because no money has been put towards making it safe. If it was safe, I would be the first one in my classroom with my children, teaching them because I have strong compassion for them. I care deeply about their lives and their mental things that are going on with them at home, social and not economical things. I know their parents probably need them in the classroom because although I'm not a babysitter, I am a babysitter. And it's become something that's needed by families. And so I understand. I have so many friends. I understand wanting your child to be there. I understand that. But I don't understand telling teachers, because there's been conversations of teachers are selfish. Teachers should be in there. We should be in there for them. And I want to be in there, but not under the conditions. We're a poorer district. Not all of the classrooms are safe for kids to go into. It would just be a terrible situation. And so it makes me really sad when I hear all of the negativity, when really I think we're all on the same side. It's just not understanding where people are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
By the way, that's my kid. That's my kid. I want to say it again.
Yeah. So Mark and Madeline, if you can unmute yourselves and then introduce yourselves, and then tell us what's going on with you guys as far as this is concerned.
Hi, sure. Mark and Madeline, Ebony and Ivory, as some of our friends know us. So we have had quite a journey and experience in education. Our son was in a private parochial school until from kindergarten through 10th grade. We pulled him out last year.
And that was half homeschool, half school. So
yeah,
we already were
model.
homeschooling. Yeah.
And then fully homeschooled him last year. He mostly homeschooled himself.
Unschooling.
Yeah, you can imagine. And then this year we'll finish out with the aid of an online source. I also was employed by a large charter school organization over the last 4 years. And just at the beginning of COVID, that ended. And now I'm back to being an entrepreneur that I had been 27 years before that. And that's still in the education space. And so I've got a lot of people from all different walks or perspectives. I was telling Madeline a little bit earlier when Bob mentioned about the different perspectives. It brought to mind this picture that was on LinkedIn about it's this one big ocean, and there's all these different boats of different sizes and types. And so we're all in the same situation, but we're not in the same boat. Like
we're on the same ocean.
We're in different oceans, right?
Right.
Well, that harkened back to my Navy days, because I remember we went through a typhoon on the way to Australia one time, and I was on the aircraft carrier. Our carrier could literally not move more than 15 degrees, right? It was gyrosynchronized. It would just barely move, right? And next to us was a destroyer that would come clean up out of the water and smack back down. And I was like, oh my God. So I don't know if I had empathy for them, but I certainly had sympathy. And I could also tell that they were in a different place, and they were probably doing something very differently than I was to react to that situation. But in education, I've got a friend who told me this morning, they run a much larger charter school outfit in other states,
Thousands
outside
of
of
students.
Texas, 90-something thousand students. And they've had teachers who are sending letters to the governor with their obituaries and saying, you know, you're killing us, and so on. And yet they're being told by the government, you will open up on time, et cetera, in these states. And so they're going through that struggle and trying to figure out what's the right balance and how best they can do things. And then I've got, of course, not only are we homeschoolers, but we also help some folks sell into that market. And so I get a lot of chatter on LinkedIn between the folks who want to homeschool or just want to stay out of the brick and mortar for a while, and the other people who are upset about that. And the administration, the people who are running the public schools, are actually terrified that you're going to actually leave your kids at home long term. This year, they know that they got to keep the money. Next year, if 42% of parents decide to homeschool, truly homeschool, and not enroll their kid in the local public school, then they're going to lose a lot of money. And so they figure, well, you know, the mantra in public education is we need more money, more money, more money, money, more money, more money. And if you're going to take away a big chunk of it, you're evil. You're actually destroying the ability for us to serve the kids that are going to be here. And so I understand and I empathize with that, because if I'm in a long-term situation in a business that has become accustomed to a certain way of doing things, and not just resistant, but actually bureaucratically handicapped from being able to innovate in some meaningful fashion beyond the classroom, but like institutionally or systemically. If it's very hard for me to be competitive with the homeschool market or with the charter market or the private school market or whatever, yeah, I'm looking at losing money and not being able to service my existing market as well. So I can empathize with that, and I can speak to that market. I'm in a place though in my business and in my consulting that I have to put aside my own, like Bob said, I've got my own opinions, right? I've got things that really and you may have heard unconsciously some bias or whatever in what I just said, but I have to serve what that particular client is needing. If it's a public school that hires me to help them fix something, I need to be all in for them, the same as if it's a homeschool co-op or a charter school or whatever that's hiring me to help them. So I won't try to dominate the conversation, but I guess I'm trying to say that I can understand where they're coming from just enough to realize that I can help get on their side to help them achieve their goals, and not feel like priceless nugget there, Wayne, about that,
Being victimized.
that I'm not being victimized by their choice.
Yeah, could you repeat that, Wayne? Because
Yeah,
I thought that's brilliance. That you're not victimized by other people's choices. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think people feel that way, you know, even with the school thing. If people, you know, so there's groups that want kids to go to school and put teachers at risk. There's other groups that don't. And so if I'm forced to go into a classroom I'm not ready to go into, then I'm being victimized by someone else's choices. And I think that's where government policy does the hard work of making sure that doesn't happen. But that's difficult when people aren't communicating. There's so much hatred on both sides of these issues that make it complicated.
Very
So
polarized.
my question to you, Wayne, is then what is the solution? How do we encourage people not to be victimized by other people's choices, not to feel like a victim?
Well, to not feel like a victim, you have to not be one. I mean, if you in fact are one, and sometimes our culture sets that up. It's difficult without political parties that can talk together and find mutually agreed solutions, and that's the problem we're having. They can't even talk. Their solutions are mutually exclusive, right? So someone is going to be victimized because we can't have the conversations our book is saying are really important for us to have. So I guess if you feel like you are a victim, you make the best of it as you can and move on. But the best thing is to find ways to address it without doing that.
Right. Okay. I guess what I was thinking is about that teacher who's sending an obituary to the governor. How is the solution for her not to feel like a victim to say, okay, I'm not going. I got to find another line of business. So I can figure out, I need to figure out how to become a blogger. I'm saying, is that have we lost that sense of personal responsibility and agency that teacher feels like the victim, and where they're not opening themselves to choices such as, okay, I could teach from online, or I could, like, starting to look at options to solve her problem. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, it's definitely a way. Yeah.
I think it is. I think it's a huge problem, but I'd like us to move on to talk about literally the chapter so that we're not getting caught up into the educational decisions and all that. This chapter is about so much more, and I understand that that's part of it, but for the benefit of our listeners, if we could move on and bring people in about the compassion topic, I think that's the best way to go. But I do appreciate all the dialogue so far.
So are there others here on the Zoom call with us that would like to talk about feeling or having compassion for others who are making choices that are different than the one that you would make? Just want to make sure that everybody that wants to chime in gets an opportunity to do that. If not, we'll move on to the next question. So the next question I have on page 105, Wayne, you said, there's something wonderful about stepping outside of our own story to engage others with empathy and understanding. So I want to move on to another topic of conversation that we've been having as a nation, and that's the racial injustices and racial inequality. So the national conversation about racial justice and equality has impacted us all in many ways, even me. There are many people whose eyes have been opened to the injustices that people of color experience in their everyday lives that white people never imagined. So in what ways have you been encouraged by these conversations? And in what areas do you still see the work to be done?
Yeah,
Anybody?
I can speak to that a little bit. I'm really encouraged by the people I know who a year ago couldn't be in this conversation with any kind of compassion for someone different than them. And they are. And they're reading things and they're talking to people, and it's opening their understanding. And that gives me a lot of hope. It gives me incredibly hopeful. On the other side are friends that are even further, let's say, to the right of things. And the amount of lawlessness and violence that has traveled around the protests, not necessarily part of, but around them, has just dug them in deeper. And that's the part that makes me really sad. It's easy when you don't like something or you don't want to face something to paint the other side in the broadest brush you can. My best intentions to go up against their worst actions, and they compare the worst of something. And we're getting a lot of that right now too. We really are. There's a lot of hatred and anger. I'm in a very conservative part of my state right now, and some of the conversations I'm in just from arriving here just make my heart hurt, because people are just closed off to the conversation. They want the stormtroopers to come in from the government and clean up all the lawlessness, and there's just not a bit of compassion that reaches into where people have been hurting for a long time and been ignored, and now there's some traction for understanding, and they want to go down that road. But that's also been hijacked by people who want a more anarchist state at the moment, and they have political agendas in that. What gives me hope, I want to read this to you, because I had this question yesterday. I'm thinking about it. I get an email yesterday from a friend. He sends me flowers. He sends me pictures of roses. And at the top of it, the subject line is, why I take flowers to two 95-year-olds at the retirement center. And he says this: I give and serve so I'm not consumed by the hatred I see swirling around me. Now, this is a former pastor, former alcoholic. He understands addiction well. Says, the image of God placed inside me will be destroyed if I give into the darkness. Over the years, many have hated me. Many times people have tried to derail my career and at times my life. To save my own soul, I cannot give into the hatred, to the evil. Serving and giving is the way for me to live. Jesus said we're to love our enemies, not for a misplaced sense of revenge or to prove our moral superiority, but so we are not consumed by the same spirit that possesses them. And I just, man, to think this guy's made a choice to take flowers to two 95-year-olds at a retirement center, not relatives, is because he doesn't want to be consumed by the anger that torments his soul. So the early part of that quote is, there's so much enabling in us when we learn to live a loving, compassionate lifestyle, even against all the hatred going on around it. I think both sides have a lot to work on. I think the book is always, there's more people that are not on those extreme sides. There's people who want to have an honest, rational conversation and resolve some things, but they don't have a lot of the microphones. That's the problem.
Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in on this and say, in what ways have we been encouraged by the conversations happening, and in what areas do you see the work that still needs to be done?
Hey guys,
Well,
this is
Anna,
Sandra. I'll chime in. I'm Arnita's sister. I'm from Tennessee. And definitely not surprised by any of the injustices that so many people are seeing these days, but I am encouraged. So I work for a international company that, from a diversity standpoint, it's pretty much non-existent. Probably less than 1%, like globally. Like it's not diverse at all. Culturally diverse, but when you look at race and gender, not so much. And just this week, we did have a couple of gentlemen who reached out, who wanted to engage in a conversation with HR about diversity. We don't have a diversity initiative. We don't have anything related to that. And so I was encouraged because they were interested in starting that conversation with us. So we did meet with them earlier this week to start the conversation. And it's interesting because it is from a perspective of a Caucasian male. So I'm like, we need some different diversity in this conversation, because that's somewhat one-sided, other than my perspective. It's not very diverse. So all of the dialogue that has occurred around the world, in the United States, it has come into my workplace, and it is at least making people think and look around them in the work environment. So that's very encouraging, and hopefully by next year we will have some type of diversity strategy. Like I said, it does not exist, so we are writing it and building it from the ground up. But it's very encouraging that at least people reached out.
Well, thank you.
I will say this. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'll get to Janine next.
I was just going to say that, since the George Floyd incident, I've had maybe close to 100 or 100, I don't know, a bunch of conversations with people. And I will say this, in light of the whole topic of compassion, a lot of the conversations I was having at first, say a couple of months ago, all the conversations were, when I talk about those conversations, I mean between my white friends and even people I didn't know. It was, I'm sorry, I didn't know, I want to seek to understand. I felt as if I had to be somewhat of an ambassador for my race. However, lately, I've seen things sort of switch a bit. And I'm now sort of being pressed against the wall to have some level of compassion as well. Compassion for people who seem a little bit bothered by some of the demands and the incessant talk about race and the systematic racism that never was there until someone, people keep bringing it up. And so I'm having to now have some level of compassion for those folks as well, believe it or not. And I've been, I know it's not a Christian context, but I've been thinking a lot about the story of the Samaritan, and just how the person who actually helped was the most different. And so I'm trying to take a posture of compassion in that, Gil, it's taking me more compassion not to respond to some of the Facebook posts than it is to respond gingerly and tenderly and what have you. I'm always seeking to understand, and I'm trying to put myself in that other person's place, to have empathy, but in my actions sometimes it's not saying anything and just listening. And there are times when I want to use the trigger finger and respond, but I'm learning to listen a lot more, especially with people who I'm sitting with face to face, to hear them out, explain themselves. Even when I'm in my mind, I'm going, don't agree, I don't agree, that's ridiculous. It's helping me to just sit back, take it in, and try to seek to understand from where they're coming from. Because just like Arnita said, rule number one, I'm not you, and I don't have your context. So a person's perception is their reality, and I think compassion helps you in conversation to take that on while you seek to understand. And so I've been challenged sort of on the other side of things, and really being forced to listen more than I have been in the past.
Janine, you were wanting to speak. You can unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, my name is Janine, and I know Anna from her book tour. And when she was out in California, we went to Facebook and all kinds of exciting places. So my family lives in Redding, California, and it's pretty conservative there. And before, my brother was a retired police officer. Before he passed away almost 3 years ago, I got to know the chief of police in Redding, who was a good friend of my brother's. And so when everything happened with George Floyd, Bill and I started, kind of instant messaging back and forth. And he was giving, I was able to hear his perspective on what it's like to be, a police officer. They don't have a lot of people of color in Redding. It's more low-income white people. So anyway, we had a lot of dialogue going back and forth, and they wanted to have a protest in Redding, but they wanted to keep it safe for everyone. And I was so encouraged to see him leading the charge. There was, Bill and 2 or 3 other people of color leading the protest in Redding. And it was a perfectly peaceful protest. And they showed pictures of them all gathering and praying. And it was just such an encouraging thing for me to see Redding really trying to have a protest in a really positive way. And so I was really excited to see that. And then my niece's husband is very conservative. And so having a conversation with him was hard because he's completely against all of the pushback on the police that he sees. And he grew up without a lot of privilege. And so the way I was able to kind of get his wheels to turn a little bit, because he was taking a hard stance, was using that relay race for privilege. And I said, clearly you would be at the back of the line with a lot of other people on privilege. You didn't have a privileged life growing up. I said, but you know what? When you and that person of color make it in the world, and you're both out driving your new Tesla or BMW, I said, the difference between you and that person of color is if your plates aren't up to date, you won't get pulled over because of the color of your skin. That's your privilege. And it was the first time I'd ever really kind of seen his wheels turn, so I heard and understood where he was coming from, but that said, this is just like another layer that we as white people don't know anything about. And I really did see like the light bulb kind of go off. And he said, I hadn't thought of it that way. So I was so grateful for that. So.
Can I jump in on this?
Absolutely.
I was raised in a racist home, a racist atmosphere. I was literally told that Black people were not really human beings, but that they were highly developed animals. I have to be honest with you. This is what I was told. This is how I was raised. And it was, as a young teenager that a light came on. I began doing some independent reading apart from my family. But this is the way I was raised. And I can tell you, because of that, there is an understanding of people that are so frightened of anything that they, number one, cannot understand. And number two, there's a fear that they're going to lose their position in society and culture. And so I can feel that that's very real. So I can put myself in. Joe South had a song years ago called "Walk a Mile in My Shoes," and it would all behoove all of us to walk a mile in one another's shoes, because this is how things work. Even the crazies, the ones who are out there. I mean, I just saw a video of a young man holding up a Black Lives Matter sign in Arkansas, and he just stood on a street corner holding a sign, and car after car came by, and the vile things that were said to him. I mean, we still have a long way to go, but I'm telling you, those are the people I was raised around. Those are the people. And so my heart breaks that they cannot see. Janine, I love the examples that you gave of light bulbs going on for people. I had a guy that we just had our gate redone, and he came out and he started engaging me in conversation, and I could tell he was in a different place than me. His daughter is a police officer here in the city, and he's got very extreme views on things. Before he was done, I gave him a book. But he started talking about Confederate monuments and those types of things. And, we don't want to erase our history. And I literally just said, we've got Black children in the South going to things like Robert E. Lee High School. It exists. I mean, these high schools are named after Confederate, quote unquote heroes. And I said, would you ever expect a Jewish child in Germany to go to Adolf Hitler High School? And he looked at me. It stopped him in his tracks. And he said, I've never thought of that before. And I said, that's what this is. We just want to put ourselves in other people's shoes, to feel what they feel, see how they see, and understand that their experience, like Arnita says, is different than ours. So I feel it on both sides, guys. I mean, I've been out with Black Lives Matter. I have marched, and yet most of my friends would never be caught dead in something like that, ever. It would be the worst thing in the world. And like Wayne said, the Central Valley, this may as well be, the Bible Belt in the South. It really is that way here. And so we're at a place where good things are happening. Finally, people are saying this isn't good enough anymore. And I like the phrase that says that there has never been a birth in history that has happened without blood. Every birth has been accompanied by blood. And so I have to tell you, from where I sit, I'm okay. I'm okay. Let justice have her day, and let's go forward and see what it looks like.
I want to piggyback on Gil. No, you talk, Jennifer, because you have not spoken.
And introduce yourself.
You go first. No.
And you'll need to unmute. Okay, there you go.
I got it. Thank you. I am Jennifer Cook. I am friends with Arnita for probably about the past 5 years, I would say, give or take. Wife, mom, and full-time college student. I work full-time and go to school full-time. And so I just wanted to piggyback also on what Gil said and what Bob kind of alluded to. I am having a problem with people that are in the yeah, but stage. Yeah, I want you to go ahead and it's okay to be upset, but I don't want you to do it that way. you know, yeah, I see your injustice, but do it my way. And my husband pointed out something that I had never thought about before. And he said, how selfish is it, and are we as a people, to tell someone how to hurt and how to heal at the same time? Yeah, it's okay. I'm going to validate you and say it's okay that you hurt, and I understand your hurt, but I don't want you to do it that way. I don't want you to pull down statues. I don't want you to spray paint buildings. I don't want you to ruin things. It's very selfish, and I'm having a very hard time with that, because I see in the Bible where Jesus himself made a whip. He might not have used that whip, but he made it, and it was him saying, look, I'm frustrated. I'm just as frustrated as you are. So I'm with Gil. I heard all the compassion. I heard all of the people wanting to be there and be with people when it first came out. But now we're in the yeah, but stage. So I feel the compassion draining. I feel the conversations, but I feel the compassion leaving.
I was going to say, you know, just to piggyback on something that Gil said, I find myself, and I'm an author on this book, so I've had a lot of discussion. I've had discussions like this for many years, but I find myself having to find a whole different level of compassion for some of the nonsense I see posted, because some of the stuff that people write is so uncompassionate. It has zero compassion in it. But if you were to challenge them on their compassion level, they would absolutely argue you down that they are compassionate people. But from your response, I can tell you're not. So I'm having to find a whole nother level of compassion and forbearance with people who are white people who are coming into this illumination of racial injustice, which is not new for us. It's new for you. It's not new for us. Yeah. So I think, Gil, I love the aspect of compassion that you brought in, that as an African American, we still have to have a whole nother level of compassion just to go into the conversations. Yeah, because, you know, our personalities are different. I'm very direct. I can look at you and say, no, that's an absolute racist statement, and say it and love you the next day and move on. Ask Bob and Wayne. I have that personality, but everybody doesn't. So I love that you brought in having to find your own level of compassion as well, because I would agree with that.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Yes. I find it interesting. Mark and I have been married 28 years. And so we've experienced racism from the get-go. But we never looked for it. When we were dating 30 years ago, we would go into a restaurant and we would get a lot of looks. And as the years went by, that stopped. There was less and less and less. And I would ask him, you know, is it us? We just don't notice this anymore? Or is it people changing? I believe people have changed. So us going somewhere, it's almost no big deal, right? So I literally think that for us, we have experienced less and less and less and less and less racism over the years. We did not, and I'm telling you, we experienced really harsh racism on our wedding day. Okay, I mean, it's, you know, if I told you some of the stories, you will have tears. Okay, but I never expected. I don't look for it. I don't know. I think it was 6 years ago after Ferguson, a white cop stopped me. And I get stopped all the time because I speed a lot. So, you know, and so I always thought, okay, they're doing their job. I'm not doing my job. I never for once did I think it was a racial issue. Although a couple of times, you know, I was driving a brand new car and the cop was like, is this yours? I'm like, are you kidding me? You know, that's crazy, right? But I was like, I just thought, okay, fine, whatever. But this one time, this cop stops me for speeding. He's white. And most of the time they let me go. Most of the time they give me a warning and bye. And so I thought that after he came by, I thought, man, he went back there and I thought this is a 50-50, but I feel like I'm gonna get a ticket. after he gave me a ticket, which turned out to be $290, I said, "Sir, can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What would make you feel honored?" And he was like, "What?" I said, "I really would like to know what would make you feel honored. I tell you what, I respect you as a man. I respect you. I respect your uniform. And I am really," and here I started crying because I was like, I see, this us versus them in our country right now that is just heartbreaking. And I just want to know. And he just didn't know what to do with that question. And from then on, I've asked that question over the years to any cop I see. Either I look him in the eye and I'll say, I really thank you, especially with my kids. We'll walk up to them, look him in the eye and say, I want you to know that we're grateful that you're there for our family, and we respect you and the uniform. And, that touches them. It just, I'm telling you, I've had incredible conversations with cops about how they feel about people and respect. And again, this has been going on for 6 years at least. So I think like you say, compassion is about humanity. It's about seeing a person and engaging with a person. And so it's hard for us, it's hard for me to hear, I'll leave it at that.
I would just add, my favorite uncle was in law enforcement and was a big hero cop. And I was raised very conservatively, and I remain very conservative in spite of many of the things. I have illegal immigrants in my family. I am married to a Black and brown person in the person of this beautiful lady. And so while I understand and agree with many things that are not quote unquote conservative side, I still have a lot of conservative beliefs and opinions. And so I hold to the quote that's sometimes attributed to Mark Twain of or Abe Lincoln, whoever the internet meme wants to credit it with. But basically, you have the right to wave your fist until it ends at the point of my nose, right? And so it does bother me when justified rage goes out of a reasonable, what I judge to be a reasonable level of control. And so I say, I don't believe in building walls, but I do respect boundaries. I don't believe in putting a wall between us and another country. I do believe that both sides should respect the boundary as long as it's there. And so, the spray painting, the looting, the burning, the passing out of if you want to not have your store picketed at, you need to get on here and donate to this organization type of things that our neighbors got. That's uncalled for.
Right.
And I understand where it comes from. I know why it's there, and how it could get much worse. But I think a certain level of responsibility is going to go, not only from a marketing perspective, easier to persuade people, but it's just a sense of decency. And so back to her point about humanity, if I can just see her mom, who's been, well, I won't say this on public, but I will say if I see another person who is not in alignment with what I think was done right, I can still honor that they had the right to make that choice, and that that I need to help understand that. I like what you're saying about seek first to understand. And then how can I help heal them without, kind of that first do no harm. That's all I got.
Well, I've got to bring you in, Kelly. You're driving. We got to hear your voice.
Okay.
Before
and
we
I'm not
get off
driving.
this call.
I promise I'm not the one driving.
Okay, well, we just got to hear from you.
Yes, I am in the passenger seat going through the panhandle of Texas right now, headed. I'm Kelly Stresnick, and I live in Keller, Texas, which is a suburb outside of Fort Worth. And I will say, as far as what gives me hope in this conversation, I'm 44 years old, and I think a lot of my friends that are my age, we grew up in a time where you just didn't talk about it. And by not talking about race or racism, then that made you not a racist. And I feel like a lot of my friends and peers are having to relearn some of that and learning. I mean, the real term right now is being anti-racist. And I feel like that really ties into what y'all talked about in your book about willful understanding. And I just see a lot of my peers and friends in my circles finally having that moment of having that willful understanding. And it's really awkward and it's uncomfortable, and a lot of them are scared of saying the wrong thing, but they're finally at least having the conversation, which is so different than what they grew up with, where you just didn't talk about it. And what also gives me hope for that, for people in my peer groups, but then also just the younger generation, I think they are leaps and bounds ahead of all of us in that. I know Arnita, and she's going to come and actually do some work with the organization I work with, which is it's a nonprofit that cares for these children, and high percentage of the kids that we take care of are Black or Hispanic. And so in preparation for some of the work we're going to do, she encouraged us to talk to some of these kids and say, what has your experience been with racism? So one of the first kids I was talking to, he's a 13-year-old boy, and he's lived most of his life in schools that were all Black. He's Black, 13-year-old boy. And so I'm talking to him, and I'm just fumbling over my words, trying to have this conversation with him. And he just finally says, Miss Kelly, just say it. You can just say it. You can just ask me what you want to know. And I was like, you're right. Why is it so difficult? And it was a good light bulb moment for me as someone that I feel like this is something that I care about a lot, and I've done a lot of work myself, but it's still awkward and it's still hard just to have those conversations. But I just love and circled and highlighted in the book where y'all talk about that willful understanding. And I think that's just so key. And what gives me hope is a lot more people have that. And I hope that really continues.
So we are coming up on 1 hour. So I wanted to end with this quote from Bob on page 109 in the book. Life is equal parts journey and process. Many of my experiences are the fruit of a heart that has been broken, often against its will. I began to view life and people through a different lens, noticing those who were a bit bruised, just like me. And when you get close to people, you'll find they are just like you. And that's where compassion can take root. So I think that's a great place to close this out, and to talk about, or to just mention that it's in getting close to other people who are different than you, that proximity that you guys talk about in the book, where we are able to gain a better understanding and have the kinds of conversations that are just not possible on social media.
Right.
So thank you guys all for being here. Does anybody want to end with some final thoughts or anything to add?
Well, I'd like to say thank you to you, because you're really good at this, Anna.
Okay.
I mean, you are just fantastic. I appreciate everybody that came and took part in the discussion today, and hope we had some stuff to chew on and to think about and to go forward and shift some things. So
Thanks, everybody.
bye, everybody.
Amen.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. You guys have done an awesome job with the book, and I sing its praises everywhere. I'm telling you, my son is a filmmaker, and I'm asking him, will you make a documentary with me about the stories that come out of people reading your book? So anyway, I'll talk to you about it.
Let it be.
Let it
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks,
See
everyone.
ya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.